Today we hear from Dwana Goldstone, who brings us a much more recent story that reminds us that the legacy of slavery and segregation meant that the doors to acceptance opened up only very slowly. Dr. Goldstone received her BA in American Studies and a minor in African American Studies from the University of Iowa. After receiving her MAT in Secondary English Education from Brown University, she received her PhD from the University of Texas at Austin in American Civilization, and her book, Integrating the 40 Acres, A 50-Year Struggle for Racial Equality at the University of Texas, won the Coral H. Tullis Memorial Prize for the best book on Texas history. Among other projects, she is working on an essay on Barbara Smith, the subject of her talk today.
Thank you very much, Frank, for inviting me. On February 26, 1946, Heman Marian Swett, an African-American postal worker with, as he said, a yen to become a lawyer, applied for admission to the University of Texas Law School. Because the state constitution required segregated educational facilities for its Black and white students, University of Texas President Theophilus Painter explained to Swett that the state would establish a separate but equal law school for the state's African-American residents. A team of NAACP lawyers who represented Swett filed suit to force the University of Texas to admit him. When the Supreme Court decided in June 1950 that Swett had a personal and present right to a legal education equivalent to that offered by the state to students of other races, it ended a 4-year fight to desegregate the University of Texas. In the summer of 1950, Swett and some 16 other African Americans enrolled in the law school and the school's other graduate programs, the only African American students who could not enter a degree program at one of the state's Black colleges could attend the graduate programs at UT. This would remain the status quo at the University of Texas until the Supreme Court's decision in Brown versus Board of Education on May 17, 1954. Within weeks of the court's decision, white UT administrators met to ponder how the Brown decision might affect undergraduate enrollment. H.Y. McCown, the university registrar and dean of admissions, believed that the Brown decision would force the University of Texas to reevaluate its current policy. Thus, to exclude as many Negro undergraduates as possible, McCown suggested the university adopt a policy that required all Black applicants to take their first year of classes at one of the state's Black colleges. This solution, McCown reasoned, would keep Negroes out of most classes where there are a large number of white girls. Consequently, university administrators decided not to admit Black undergraduates. On May 31, 1955, the US Supreme Court announced its decision in what many have called Brown 2. Sensing the slow pace of desegregation in education throughout the South, the court ordered that integration be carried out with, quote, all deliberate speed. A week after the court's decision, University of Texas President Logan Wilson announced that the Board of Regents would meet on July 8th in order to define the path the university will follow on undergraduate integration. Fearing a potential and costly lawsuit and more damage to the school's reputation, on July 8, 1955, the University of Texas Board of Regents announced that all qualified students would be admitted to the graduate school regardless of whether the desired programs of study were offered at the state's Negro institutions. The Regents also voted unanimously to abolish racial segregation at Texas Western College for the upcoming school year and at all other branches of the university system beginning in the fall of 1956. With this edict, the University of Texas became the first Southern state to desegregate all of its colleges and universities. Though desegregated by law, the University of Texas at Austin never fully integrated. The distinction I make here, though seemingly subtle, is actually an important one. For while the University of Texas desegregated its undergraduate and graduate programs in compliance with the court's decision in Brown and Brown 2, it never integrated them, therefore never allowing Black students to become full and participating members of the University of Texas community. In other words, what existed on the University of Texas campus was a very clear distinction between public and private integration. Publicly, African-American students were allowed to enroll in classes and participate in extracurricular activities. Privately, however, University of Texas administrators took steps to limit the kinds of extracurricular activities in which African American students could partake, especially those activities that suggested, either implicitly or explicitly, that Blacks and whites were equal. Administrators specifically targeted those activities in which interracial sex, or hints of it, might be present. One particular incident at the University of Texas challenged the rules of miscegenation on campus and thrust one young Black woman into the national spotlight. In the spring of 1957, Barbara Louise Smith was a 19-year-old African-American music student in the College of Fine Arts. A transfer student from historically Black Prairie View A&M, Smith came to the University of Texas in the fall of 1956 to study with Edra Gustafson, a well-regarded music professor. That fall, a faculty committee chose Smith, who many people said had the best soprano voice of anyone in her class, to play the female lead in Purcell's opera, Dido and Aeneas. Based on Virgil's Aeneid, the opera is a classic recounting of the tragic love between Dido, Queen of Carthage, and Aeneas, the Trojan prince. Because the committee had chosen two white men, David Blanton and David Richards, to play the role of Aeneas, the opera would have an interracial cast. Few knew at the time that the opening lines of the opera would prove to be so prophetic. "Oh, my sorrow, I am possessed with torment. Peace and I are strangers grown." Immediately after the faculty committee chose Smith, both she and E.W. Dottie, the dean of the College of Fine Arts, began receiving as many as 3 threatening anonymous calls per week. Some callers threatened to do bodily harm to Smith and to exact revenge against the University of Texas. One such call to Smith's dormitory came from a state representative's wife who, after asking if Smith lived at that residence, said that she better not appear on the stage. In spite of the phone calls, Dottie refused to remove Smith from the opera. Few seemed to notice, or at least they did not publicly comment upon, Smith's role in the play until Representative Jerry Sadler of Purcell in East Texas raised the issue of an African-American woman playing the romantic lead opposite a white man during a legislative session that winter. Sadler said that he was specifically protesting the inclusion of a Negro in the cast, particularly the role of Dido, who, he said, is a redhead. Sadler's description of Dido being a redhead, as if only white women could be redheads, differed from the faculty committee's description of Dido and Aeneas. They argued that there was virtually no action on the part of the principals, who merely stand and sing. Nonetheless, because the title characters are supposed to be in love, the appearance of a Black Dido and a white Aeneas proved offensive to many people. To further make his point, Sadler promised to vote against appropriations for the university because, he said, they have Negro undergraduates. Representative Joe Chapman of Sulphur Springs in East Texas also objected to Smith's inclusion in the opera, arguing that the people of Texas don't want the mixing of Negroes and whites publicly, and the University of Texas should not do it from that standpoint. Some 6 weeks before the College of Fine Arts was to stage its production of Dido and Aeneas, UT President Logan Wilson instructed the college to remove Smith from the cast. Smith, however, was not told of President Wilson's decision until just a couple of days before the production was to go on. Her removal touched off a storm of controversy and highlighted the lengths to which University of Texas officials would go to keep African-American students from being full members of the school. It also highlighted the university's fear of Black bodies, interracial sex, and white Texan obsession with protecting the South's greatest treasure, the white woman. President Wilson's decision to dismiss Smith relied in part on many Texans, both Blacks and whites, fears of miscegenation. Although white Texans usually applied this fear to sexual relations between Black men and white women, a fear that too often led to the lynchings of hundreds of Black men, a Black woman playing the romantic lead opposite a white man still brought these fears into the forefront. About Smith's role, Wilson had said, "In any American university, this would be regarded as venturous, but in a Southern university, it would inevitably be provocative of far-reaching consequences." The white citizens of Texas, Wilson believed, were not ready for social integration, let alone seeing a Black woman on stage in love with a white man. On basic social issues, Wilson had said in defending his decision to remove Smith, The university, is subject to the will of the majority of its citizens. In essence, President Wilson wanted desegregation at the University of Texas to be more like Booker T. Washington's definition of integration, as separate as the fingers in all things social. The university had desegregated, which many white Texans thought was disgraceful enough, but to have a white boy and a Negro girl enacting those passionate love scenes, as white citizen Raymond Orr of Kerrville wrote in a letter to President Wilson, was for many disgusting and downright vulgar. Many University of Texas students believe that the university administrators should not have removed Smith from the opera. They argue that Smith had a right to appear in the play since she had fairly won the title role. A number of University of Texas students, a significant portion of whom also supported full integration at the school, expressed their disapproval of Wilson's decision to remove Smith in several different ways. Some simply wrote letters to the Daily Texan, the student newspaper. Other students more dramatically expressed their discontent with Wilson's decision. An unknown student or group of students hung two effigies that carried the names of Representative Chapman and Sadler from the second floor railing in the rotunda of the Texas Capitol building. Another group of students circulated a petition that said in part, "As a group of interested students who are concerned about our campus's policies on integration, we would like to register our protest to the recent action taken in regard to the current opera production." Some 500 students signed the petition in just 2 days. The ALBA Club, a Latin American organization on campus, adopted a resolution condemning the removal of Smith. The presidents of the two leading service organizations, the Cowboys and the Silver Spurs, recommended that students boycott Dido and Aeneas. The Young Republicans and the Young Democrats adopted a resolution urging the investigation of all cases of racial discrimination and the university's dropping of Barbara Smith. The entire student body of the University of Texas, the resolution read in part, is affected when any student is denied his or her right to participate on an equal basis in student activities. University of Texas faculty were divided in their opinion of Smith's removal. Roger Shattuck, an assistant professor in Romance languages, believed that Smith's removal was distressing and damaging to complete integration. He called for a faculty committee on integration that would function intelligently and constructively in facing issues that might threaten the complete integration of the university. In a speech before the faculty council, Dr. John Silber, a philosophy professor, called the university's lack of official policy about the participation of African-American students in social functions unfair to our Negro students. Two business professors defended Wilson's action. In a statement delivered before the faculty committee in June, Bailey said that since the majority of Texans did not support an interracial cast, and since the University of Texas was a state-supported institution, it was compelled to conform to the desires of the majority of its citizens. Doctors J.W. Reynolds, Glenn E. Barnett, and Clyde C. Culvert of the College of Education all signed statements calling Wilson's decision judicious. The Committee of Council on Academic Freedom and Responsibility took a more middle-of-the-road opinion to Smith's removal. In its official statement on the case, the committee believed that the University of Texas had accepted the Supreme Court's decision in Brown versus Board of Education in good faith and had been successful at integrating its African-American students to a considerable degree. The committee conceded, however, that only educational integration had occurred at the university, though the goal of integration should be full opportunity to participate in both curricular and extracurricular activities. Taking into account the social climate in the state in the 1950s, the committee concluded that Wilson's decision to remove Smith was wise, since its citizens were not quite ready for an interracial cast in a university opera. The whites of Texas were simply not ready to see a Black woman playing a romantic lead opposite a white man, even if that Black woman had the best voice in the school. Many people commended Smith for how well she handled her removal from Dido and Aeneas and the subsequent controversy that followed. An editorial in the Dallas Morning News praised Smith for refusing to become another Autherine Lucy and boasted that her graceful handling of the situation had done much to help race relations. African-American Carter Wesley wrote in the Black Weekly, The Houston Informer, that Smith should be congratulated for refusing to strike back or to show any resentment over the denial of rights due her. Miss Smith, he wrote, was too dignified and poised to fight in the gutter for honors she won by their merit and worth, even if those who gave the honors were little enough to want to take them back for cheap reasons. When reporters first asked Smith about her removal, she was reluctant to answer, simply saying that it was not because of her singing abilities. "Don't you know that if it was my singing ability, I would never have been selected for the part in the beginning?" Smith replied. When she finally did speak to the press, Smith said that her first reaction was one of great hurt. "I do not believe anyone who had been practicing a role for 6 months and who had any feeling for the role she was trying to interpret could react otherwise when the role was taken from her for any reason," she said. Smith would later say that her dismissal was best for harmonious integration, and that the faculty committee that chose her to sing the lead in the opera displayed striking naivete. Although shocked by her removal, Smith said that she would have done the same thing if she were President Wilson. "I believe they want the same thing I do," Smith said in an interview, "and are trying to achieve the most harmonious fulfillment of integration at the university. I just want to go back to being a student," she said. After reading about Smith's removal in the New York Times, Harry Belafonte called Smith. Belafonte was no stranger to the University of Texas and the city of Austin. In 1954, he had appeared at Gregory Gym on the UT campus as part of the Cultural Entertainment Series. Though he thought he had one of the best and most appreciative audiences of his career at Gregory Gym, Belafonte was not able to get a hotel room in Austin. In his telephone call to Smith, Belafonte told Smith that he wanted her to know that there was someone in her corner, and he offered to give her money so that she could study music anywhere she chose. Although thrilled to death about Belafonte's offer, Smith said she wanted to stay at UT, telling Belafonte that she had found exactly what I wanted here and that I want to finish here. She also said that she was getting the best voice training she could find anywhere and that, except for this opera incident, she had been treated well at the university. Smith did, however, accept financial assistance from the Belafonte Foundation of Music and Arts for the final 2 years she remained at the University of Texas. Dido and Aeneas went on as planned, though there were only 2 performances instead of 4, and Martha Ann Kelly, a white student and Smith's alternate, played the role of Dido. Smith, who had earlier said she wouldn't miss it, attended the opera on its opening night. By all accounts, the opera was a failure. Bradford Daniels of the Daily Texan wrote of the opera, "In a word, the opera was disappointing. Primarily, it lacked spirit." He said that Kelly's singing lacked force and imaginative style. Daniel said that Dido's lament, "When I am laid in earth," was most disappointing because she did not sound like or appear to be a heartbroken woman. Time magazine reported that the auditorium was only half full for both performances, and that from the flagpole in front of the university's main building hung a swastika flag with the words "no comment" on it. Although the opera casting controversy died down for most people, Smith said the nightmares of the incident haunted her for years. "The irony of all this," she later recalled, "is that all I wanted to do was be a student in the classic sense of the word, and I was denied." Smith did return to the University of Texas the next fall, and she admitted that she felt such pain at being betrayed by people she trusted at the high echelons. She packed the auditorium of the music building at her junior and senior recitals. Some people even stood outside the auditorium to hear her sing. Smith received a Bachelor of Music and Applied Voice degree in 1959, to which Representative Chapman said, "I wish her all the success in the world. She is a great artist." Shortly after graduation, Smith left Austin for New York City to study voice, drama, dance, and languages with funds from the Harry Belafonte Foundation. She changed her last name to Conrad after discovering that there was already a Barbara Smith registered at Equity. Conrad did well in her musical career, touring Europe and eventually signing on with the Metropolitan Opera in 1981. In an ironic twist, Conrad played Marian Anderson, the African-American woman who the Daughters of the American Revolution had barred from singing in the Constitution Hall in 1937. In 1984, Conrad returned to the University of Texas for the first time since her graduation to sing an Earl Stewart's production of his opera, Al Inkafashi, based on an ancient Kaswili poem and translated as The Soul's Awakening. The performance marked the end of an inner struggle and a new beginning for Conrad. For me, it was a wonderful, exciting experience, Conrad said. The whole celebration was a celebration of me today. It was after this performance that Smith said the wounds of 1957 finally began to heal. The University of Texas, too, worked to heal these wounds as well. In 1985, Conrad received the University of Texas Distinguished Alumnus Award. And in 1987, she returned to the university, this time as the recipient of the Texas Cowboys Centennial Lectureship. Conrad's subsequent visits to Austin included some long, serious conversations with UT administrators. When asked about the opera casting controversy, Conrad first said, "The past is the past. In spite of all you have read about what was not good," she said in a 1984 interview, "I had a lot of marvelous experiences and good friends in Texas." I had the pleasure of meeting Barbara Conrad, and I was so impressed with her willingness to forgive the University of Texas for the way she had been treated all those years ago. I was there when, in March 2009, the Texas House of Representatives passed a resolution to honor Barbara Smith Conrad. And what I remembered most from that experience was Conrad's humility as she thanked everyone for the honor. Conrad was never bitter, and she used her time at the state capitol to talk about the importance of forgiving, but never forgetting. She also urged those of us in the audience to use our voices to fight for equality, especially for those who cannot fight for themselves, so that no one would ever experience the pains that she did. The University of Texas also funded a documentary film about Conrad. Titled When I Rise, the film debuted at the South by Southwest Film Festival in March 2010 in Austin, Texas, and is a staple on PBS during Black History Month. Barbara Conrad was there too, and again she spoke, without any hint of anger or bitterness in her voice, about how her experiences at UT in the late 1950s never defined the life she created for herself. "Why be bitter when I've had so much good in my life?" Conrad told the crowd who had gathered to watch and listen to her sing. Conrad died on May 22nd, 2017, and I'm so glad that I was able to share her story in my dissertation and later in my book, Integrating the 40 Acres. There are numerous Black women like Conrad whose role in the civil rights and women's rights movement have been minimized or just ignored. As Paula Giddings writes in her seminal book, When and Where I Enter, the racial movement of the 50s and 60s brought Black women once again to the forefront of the civil rights struggle, but their specific role as women in the movement was not defined. In Outlook, the final chapter of her book, Giddings writes about the election of a conservative president whose views concerning women and Blacks smack of the turn of the century. This was in 1984, and she was writing about Ronald Reagan. Giddings continues, "Civil rights gains are being rolled back. Black communities and families are in disarray, and the biggest feminist organization largely ignores the priorities and needs of Black women and other women of color." 35 years later, and with the now former president and his supporters as the face of today's white supremacy, many of us would argue that very little has changed. Thus, we need to hear the stories of Black women like Barbara Smith Conrad, because our unique status has had an impact on both racial and feminist values. History suggests that it is only when these stories are told can a society, one born in the depths of racism and sexism, be transformed. Thank you.